Hey everyone, welcome to Our Small Footprint. I have a video for you today that I filmed yesterday and forgot to do an intro for, so I'm doing one this morning before I release this video, and it is more apple prep and things like that. So I got a late start in the day. It's a bit of a rushed job in the afternoon, but I did a new recipe. I did some orange chocolate marmalade, which is quite nice, and some more stewed apples, some more apple syrup. What else did we do? We minced up pork. We made appleberry cordial in the steam juicer as well. So come along and see what we got done, and there will still be a few more days of apple to go and I need to get the sausages made, and there's still a few more days in the kitchen to go. So this is what I got done today, yesterday, and today is Apollo's birthday, so I will probably make a cake with him and things like that, so I might remember to put the camera on for that too, and I will see you again in the next day or so. Thank you very much for watching. If you're new here and you haven't subscribed, it'd be great if you'd subscribe, hit the thumbs up button. All of that helps for the channel to be seen by more people, and it's very much appreciated. I will see you again maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. Thanks, guys. I started off the morning with bread, as I regularly do. We did sourdough baguettes this morning. This is a favourite recipe of mine. It's from Emilie Raffa in one of her books. I'll link the book below. And it's an overnight proofing recipe, which works really well for me. So I make a quadruple batch of this dough because there's a lot of it, and I make it up the night before, and then it comes inside at a distance to the fire to proof overnight. When you get it in the morning, it's really bubbly, really jiggly and bubbly. It's a very wet dough, but you can see that it has structure to it, and all you do is you pour it out onto your mat, and then you stretch it a little bit into a sort of a rectangle shape, and then you fold it in half on top of itself, and that's pretty much the shaping. From that point, you just slice it into lengths. So I do a double batch in each bowl, and then I slice each one into about 6 pieces. It just really depends on how it falls out of the bowl and how it folds up. And then I take each of those lengths and I place them on a baking tray, and I give them a little bit of a twist. So a twist in the opposite direction from each end, just to create that rustic baguette type look to it. And then they get placed on the tray. In the recipe, Emilie Raffa does suggest putting some thyme or something on the top of them, which would probably be lovely. I haven't done it because I just haven't got around to it, I suppose. I really like this recipe because of its simplicity, and because they're so good even when you don't have to do anything else. It can be made with all-purpose flour or baker's flour. I've had success with both, and the simple just plop it out and place it on a tray means that of a morning it's only an extra half an hour of work to get individual sized bread that's ready to bake that morning, unlike some of my boulets and stuff that have to be proofed overnight, then shaped in the morning, then fridged for the day before being baked either that night or the next morning. This one's a great one for just proofing overnight, pulling it out in the morning, spending half an hour quickly to stick it on some trays. Each tray only takes about 30-35 minutes to cook, and then they are ready to go, and they're lovely toasted the next day, or you can freeze them however you want to eat them. They're a very versatile dough, this one, and very minimal time required to make it. And this is what they look like when they come off the trays, all cooked. And then the inside has this lovely airy bubbling to it that lends to a crunchy texture. It's not too heavy, and we just really enjoy it. It's definitely worth giving a go. And her book has there's a raspberry ginger snap, like a sweet bun in there that I really want to try. I'm going to have to make some ginger snap cookies or buy some ginger snap cookies purely to try that one particular recipe because it looks really good. After I got the bread done, I started on one of the first tasks. Now, I should know better than to be trying to do all of this in one afternoon. I think I started at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon because I just had a really busy morning. I should know better than to try and cram all this into an afternoon. So I had a few things overlap, and it all worked out in the end, I suppose. So the first thing up I wanted to try was some Chocolate Orange Marmalade. So I found that there was still some oranges sitting in a box that the kids hadn't eaten yet and starting to look a bit sad. So I wanted to do something with that, but I didn't want to do another batch of the boiled oranges on the shelf because I didn't really have the time to boil the oranges. So I did this Choc Orange Marmalade, which ended up being more time consuming anyway. But, you know, it is a Pomonas pectin recipe, so a low sugar recipe. You take the peel off a couple of the oranges. Now, I probably wasn't anywhere near as pedantic as I needed to be to remove the pith, and again, that's part and parcel of what I was saying about trying to cram things in. I did this a little haphazardly, and I probably should have taken a little bit more effort to take more of the pith off the skin, or used my zester. I don't know why I didn't use my zester, because you have to slice these pieces up anyway, but anyway, so you have to take skin off with trying not to take too much pith off it, and then you need to peel all the oranges and get as much pith off those as well. And again, I wasn't pedantic, but you're supposed to take as much pith as possible off. I did have a thought later that maybe I could have used some of my jarred oranges to make this, and I might try that again later because they've had all the bitterness boiled out of them already, and you're left with the pulp, which would probably make a really nice one of these. So anyway, so you got to peel all the oranges. I used all the skins that were left over to make some more citrus vinegar, so I just cram as many skins will fit into a jar. I'm using a 1 litre ghee jar here, and jam them all into the jar and cover them with white vinegar, and then it just sits on a shelf for a few weeks, and eventually the vinegar looks sort of pale orange and it has a real citrus scent to it, and I use that diluted in my spray bottles to clean my benches and things like that. It works really well. I love the smell of it. It's a little bit nicer than just straight vinegar, and they look pretty on my shelf too, especially once I stop being slack and get around to taking these labels off these jars. Once that was out of the way, so you chop all the orange pieces up nice and small. They will break down a little bit more, but you are going to have some of these chunks in your marmalade, so you want to be aware of that when you're chopping them and cut them accordingly to how you think is going to work for you. I know that the kids probably won't like this jam because it's going to have bits of skin and chunks in it, so I wasn't overly concerned because it's going to be me eating it probably, and I don't have a problem with chunky jam, so I just diced it up roughly and stuck it in the pan. Once it's all in the pan, you add water and your cacao. Now, you're supposed to add cocoa as far as I'm aware, but I don't have any cocoa at the moment. I only have cacao, which means that cacao also has some bitterness to it as well, which, you know, it's taste though. We don't do very much sweet, so I wasn't too overly concerned. But anyway, added the water and the cacao and put it on the stove top to cook for a while. So it needs to come up to a rolling boil and then simmer for, I think it was 20 minutes on the recipe. While that was on the stove, I started on the apples. So I had to get more apples done today, obviously, because I need to try and get some apples done every day if possible. So I went through and grabbed a box of them again and then just worked on spiralizing them. Spiralizer worked it intermittently as previously. I just did what I could do, sliced them all up, and I was going to do something very simple with these and just stew them on the stove, so it didn't really matter what they looked like in the end. So I just spiralized the whole box full and stuck them in the pot. Once the jam has been simmering for a while, the batch of jam is 6-cup batches, and with jam you don't want to tend to double it because they just don't set up well. So once it came off the heat, I measured out a 6-cup batch back into the pot. So I poured it all into another bowl and then measured out the 6 cups into the pot again so that I could do the standard 6-cup batch, because I have never had much success doubling jams, and they do advise you not to, that it's easier to work in the small batches. So that's what I did. Once you have that 6-cup quantity back in your pot, you need to add the calcium water. So as I said, this is the Pomonas pectin that I'm using, or it's not Pomona's brand, but it's Green Living Australia brand calcium pectin. So you add the calcium water, and you add 1/4 cup of lemon juice as well. Then you mix it all up, and it goes back on the heat. So you want to bring it back up to a boil before you add your sugar and pectin. So this goes back on the heat to come back up to a boil. Once it's at a rolling boil, and a rolling boil is where it's boiling, and if you draw a spoon through it, it doesn't stop boiling. So you need to get it to that. Otherwise, if you put a spoon in it and it stops boiling, that's not classified as a rolling boil. So a rolling boil, if you drag a spoon through it or mix it or whatever, it still has to continue to boil. Once it does that, you need to add your sugar and pectin mix. So with this type of pectin, you have to mix your pectin through your dry sugar well before you add that to your jam. So I had mixed the pectin through the raw sugar and then rolling boil, and poured the sugar and pectin mix into the jam and mixed it through really well. Keep on mixing till it comes back to a boil, and then boil it for a minute, and then take it off the heat. You don't want to boil it for too long, because you can break down the pectin so it won't set as well. So just for a minute or two, and then take it off the heat. You want to fill your jars to a 1/4 inch headspace like all jams, and I have a variety of jars as usual, some old jam jars and some half pints. I think in the second batch I used half pint ball mason, as well as the half pint luglets. Whatever I have around is what I use. So I cleaned the rims well as usual. It's a jam, so it's going to be sticky, so you want to make sure you clean the rims well. Put the lids on and tighten them accordingly. Lug lids get tightened right up. Ball mason, the rings only get tightened fingertip tight, and then got them back into canner. I used the steam canner for these ones, so I did a second batch as well after this with the leftover pulp, and did the same process again, and I did 2 batches in the steam canner with these. I decided to make another batch of the apple peel syrup, so I put all the apple peels into the pot and a couple of cinnamon sticks, and covered it with water and got it on the heat again, so that it would come up to a boil, simmer for 10 minutes, and then I put the lid to the Dutch oven on it and let it sit until I could get to it later on. I decided to use the cores and any excess pieces in the steam juicer with some frozen berries today. So we're making an apple berry cordial is the plan. So we drink cordial with our soda stream. We made the pineapple scrap cordial recently, and I regularly make just a berry one using the frozen berries, but frozen berries aren't exactly cheap, so we're extending this by using the apple as well. So all those cores and any bruised bits and things like that go into the steam juicer with the end of a bag of frozen berries and put on the stovetop. This is what my stove's looking like at the moment. So I've got the steam juicer on one side, and I've got the big pot of the stewing apples on the other side. I really love this Camp Chef stove. It's linked in the comments below, and it was well worth the purchase. While all that's going on, I had to mince up the pork that I had marinated the other day. So I had marinated it and stuck it in the fridge. The intent is to make sausages with it, but I haven't had time. I've got 2 more pork legs in there that need doing. I'm actually going to start them tomorrow, and I'm going to turn both of them into sausages. So I decided to just cook this mince off today. It's Apollo's birthday tomorrow, so I'm going to make pizza for dinner, so it'll be a good topping for pizza, and we had some for dinner tonight as well. But we make a zuppa toscana as well, which is a sausage and potato soup, and it works really well in that too. So it will get used in many ways just like this, and it needed to be done because I had it sitting in the fridge for a couple of days. So I minced all of that through the larger mincing grid on my KitchenAid and got that done. I added some sugar to the apple and berry mix because this is going to be a cordial. I'm going to add citric acid to it as well, so it needs the sugar in it. Frozen berries aren't very sweet either, so I would normally add sugar to a berry cordial anyway, because you're going to add citric acid to it to make it last longer, and it's added to soda water, which is slightly salty. It just becomes a necessity. So I added sugar to that lot there, and you can just put it on the top and it will steam through the liquid. I then put all the apple product in the jars. Now, I realised that I didn't show you at any point the cooking of the apples, so I really need to figure out a second angle in my kitchen, because when I'm doing something like this, going backwards and forwards, I miss things. I either need to rearrange the kitchen so that the angle shows the stove, or I'm not sure yet, but I'll figure that out as we go along. Still learning here. But all I did with the apples was I threw them into the pot, and I left the lemon juice water that was in the bottom that I'd had them soaking in. I just threw that in the pot as well, rather than adding other liquid, because you add lemon juice anyway, and that water was apple flavoured because it had been soaking in apples. So I threw all the lemon juice water and the apples into the pot. I added a little bit more lemon juice for the quantity of apples, and then I added some raw sugar and some molasses, so a homemade brown sugar mix, and some cinnamon sticks. I don't have any powdered cinnamon at the moment, which I wasn't aware of. My spice order should be coming later this week, so I just added some cinnamon sticks in there and pulled them out later, and then just stewed the apples until they were nice and caramelly and soft and looked like I would use them for a pie or a crumble or a crisp or anything. I thought that this might be a good way to do it. I have those nice clean apple slices for something that I want you to be able to see the apple slices in, but this is more of basically an apple pie filling without any thickening agent, because I'm not going there after I stuffed up the last one. So this is my simplified version of an apple pie filling. It will work perfectly for most things that apple pies do, and if I ever need to thicken it, I can just warm it through with a little bit of corn flour and it'll thicken up, so I'm not concerned. We rarely do pastry on the bottom of pies anyway. It's too much hassle. I regularly do crisps or just do hand pies or pastry just on top of a pie dish or something, so it'll work out well. I cooked off all the pork that I had minced because I find it much easier, as I've said a few times, we find it much easier to use meat that is cooked rather than raw. So I don't want to freeze it raw. If I end up freezing some of this, which I probably won't because we'll use it over the next 2 days in meals. But that's the other thing too. It was raw, it needed to be used, so you either have to freeze it raw or you can cook it off and it can go back in your fridge for a few days, because now it's got a few more days use on it. So by cooking it, it's now accessible to eat on breakfast wraps, to have on the pizza, to eat with potatoes, or do whatever I need to do with it. So we cooked it all off in batches and then just put it aside in a bowl, and we had some for dinner and the rest went in the fridge. This is how the steam canner works. It's not a great angle, and where the steam canner is, it's sort of hard to shoot, and I also it's nighttime, so the lighting is pretty shocking. But this is how the steam juicer works. It has this plastic tube, and you just put that into the jars. So you warm the jars up slightly because the liquid going into them is going to be very hot, and you let the cordial go into the jars, and that's it. You just run it for about 45 minutes, and that's about the 45 minutes to an hour depending on the fruit that's in there, and that will give you about the maximum amount of juice that you will get from whatever fruit is in there. I put the stewed apples in the steam canner as well because I already had that out, and I purposely did 7 quarts because that will fit in the steam canner, so I got them going in the steam canner as well. Once they had run their process, so it was I want to say 30 minutes for quarts in the steam canner for my altitude. I put once the jars had been finished, I pulled them out of the steam canner and put them on a board to cool and seal. And I also had one break in the steam canner. I'm not real sure why. I had the steam canner at the same temperature as the jars. It ran for the 30 minutes. I don't know. There must have been a flaw in this jar because it looks like thermal shock the way except that it's got a bit of a jagged edge. Normally thermal shock, the jar comes off in a really clean circle. This has some jagged edges, which makes me think that there was some sort of a crack in the jar prior to it going into the canner, which is unfortunate because I had wasted that whole quart worth of apple pie filling. After that, I strained the apple peel syrup. I decided that I was going to put the full sugar in this one to have a look at. So the recipe calls for half a cup of sugar per cup of liquid plus an extra half cup. So I added that in, which kind of killed me. That was a lot of sugar to add, but I'm going to do it this time and compare it to the batch that I made the other day, because the batch that I made the other day is very thin. It tastes wonderful, but it's very thin. It's very appley though, and I'm a bit concerned that by adding this much sugar that this syrup will be far more sweet without that apple cinnamon flavour. But I'll have a look and I'll show you tomorrow the difference between the two different textures of them and see if it was worthwhile to add that extra sugar or not. So that was the day's worth of tasks. Another solid amount of apples canned and things like that, with a few more errors in there, but it worked out alright. So thanks for watching, and I will see you again next time.